Dr. Kim Hyun-woo wiped the sweat from his forehead as he carefully adjusted the neural scanner above his patient. The Zephyrian child's blue-tinged skin showed signs of severe trauma, but her breathing was finally stabilizing. Around him, the massive medical bay of Aurora 7 hummed with constant activity, a symphony of healing that had become his life's work. "Dr. Kim, vitals are looking good on bed 7, called out his assistant, a tall, crystalline being from the Xerion system, whose natural ability to see cellular damage made her invaluable in diagnostics. Her voice chimed like wind bells, a sound that had once seemed alien but now felt as familiar as his own heartbeat. The medical station stretched for kilometers in every direction, a floating city dedicated entirely to healing. Through the transparent, aluminum walls, Kim could see the twin suns of the Kepler system casting their golden light across the pristine white corridors. Ships from dozens of worlds docked constantly, bringing the wounded, the sick, and the desperate from across 3 galactic sectors. "Another transport incoming," announced Nurse Park Jimin over the intercom, her voice carrying the exhaustion they all felt but refused to acknowledge. She had been on her feet for 72 hours straight, moving between patients with the kind of dedication that had made human medics legendary throughout the galaxy. Kim glanced at the main display, showing incoming vessels. The refugee crisis from the Outer Rim had been overwhelming. Entire colonies were fleeing the advancing Scarith Plague, a bioweapon that turned living tissue into crystalline formations. Other species had written off the affected worlds as lost, but humans had different ideas about acceptable losses. "Jimin, how many survivors on this transport?" Kim asked, already preparing his equipment. 47 beings, mixed species, 3 critical, 15 severe. Her voice never wavered, though Kim knew she had seen enough suffering in the past 3 days to break most people. "And Doctor, there's something else. They're carrying Vorthon wounded." The medical bay fell silent for a moment. The Vorthon, Dominion had been making aggressive moves toward Coalition space for months. Their massive warships, sleek and predatory like mechanical sharks, had been spotted near several contested systems. Most species would have refused to treat enemy combatants. Humans weren't most species. Commander Lee Tae-hyun of the station's security detail watched through the observation deck as the transport ship Mercy's Call docked with Aurora 7. The power vessel was scarred and blackened, clearly having escaped some terrible battle. As the airlock cycled open, medical teams rushed forward with grav stretchers and emergency equipment. The first patients were familiar faces from the refugee camps. Tall, graceful Altarians with their distinctive silver hair now matted with blood and debris. A family of Centaurian traders, their fur singed from plasma burns. But then came the Vorthons. They were impressive beings, even wounded, standing nearly 3 meters tall when healthy, with thick armored hide that could deflect small arms fire. Their faces were almost reptilian, with intelligent golden eyes that missed nothing. These particular Vorthons wore the deep purple uniforms of Dominion shock troops, the elite forces that had been terrorizing the Outer Rim. "Sir," one of Lee's security officers whispered, "shouldn't we detain them?" Lee watched as Dr. Kim approached the first Vorthon patient, a young soldier whose left arm had been nearly severed. The human doctor showed no hesitation, no fear, just the same professional concern he gave every patient. "Our orders are clear, Corporal. This is a medical facility. Politics end at the airlock." The Galactic Medical Coalition had come to depend on humanity's medics in ways that surprised everyone, including humans themselves. While the proud Valorian Empire excelled at creating weapons that could crack planets, and the ancient Nethys Collective had mastered faster-than-light travel, humans had developed something far more precious, an almost supernatural dedication to preserving life. They would operate on their worst enemies if it meant saving a patient. They would work for days without sleep, push their bodies beyond all reasonable limits and risk their own lives to pull survivors from burning wreckage. Other species found it baffling. Humans found it obvious. "Doctor," Medical Chief Song Min-ji's voice cut through the organized chaos of the trauma bay. She was treating a Vorthon child, no more than 10 years old by their species standards, her small body covered in severe plasma burns. "We have a critical case here. The burns go down to the bone and her respiratory system is failing. I need all hands on this one. Kim immediately handed his current patient to another team and rushed over. The Vorthan child's golden eyes were filled with pain and terror. But as Kim began his examination, she seemed to calm slightly. There was something about human touch, other species claimed, that conveyed safety and hope. "What's her name?" Kim asked in carefully pronounced Vorthan, one of 17 languages he had learned during his medical career. "Zarthia," whispered the child's mother, a Vorthan civilian who had somehow ended up in this war zone. "Please, healer of Earth, save my daughter." As Dr. Kim prepared his instruments, the trauma bay around him continued its vital work. Nurse Park coordinated supplies with the efficiency of a battlefield commander. Medical Chief Song directed teams to the most critical cases. Throughout the station, hundreds of medical personnel from dozens of worlds worked together, united by a common purpose that transcended politics and species. None of them noticed the sensor alerts beginning to flash on the outer perimeter. Deep in space, Vorthan warships were dropping out of hyperspace, their weapons charging with deadly intent. The Dominion had finally decided that humanity's compassion was a weakness worth eliminating, and they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The neural interface hummed softly as Dr. Kim Hyun-woo made the final connection to save young Zarthia's damaged spine. The Vorthan child's breathing had stabilized, and the worst of the plasma burns were responding to the regenerative gel. Around him, the surgical suite maintained its sterile calm, a bubble of healing in the vast medical station. That peace shattered. In an instant, the first plasma torpedo hit Aurora 7's eastern wing with the force of a small sun. The massive station, built to withstand asteroid impacts and solar flares, groaned like a wounded beast. Emergency klaxons wailed as the lights flickered and died, replaced by the blood-red glow of emergency power. Dr. Kim's hands never wavered, even as the surgical table beneath him bucked and swayed. Years of training in battlefield medicine had taught him to work through earthquakes, ship battles, and worse. The delicate neural pathways he was repairing couldn't wait for the attack to end. "All medical personnel, this is not a drill." "Nurse." Park Jimin's voice crackled over the intercom system, fighting through the static caused by the electromagnetic pulse of the weapons. "We are under attack. Repeat, Aurora 7 is under attack." Through the reinforced windows of the surgical suite, Kim could see the source of their nightmare. Vorthan warships emerged from hyperspace like predators sensing wounded prey. Their hulls were black as void, covered in weapon ports that glowed with charging energy. The lead vessel, a massive dreadnought called the Bone Crusher, fired another volley of plasma torpedoes that lit up the darkness of space. The station's defense grid tried to respond, but Aurora 7 was a medical facility, not a fortress. Its shields were designed to deflect debris and radiation, not military-grade weapons. Each torpedo that struck sent shockwaves through the kilometers-long structure, causing sections to buckle and atmosphere to vent into space. "Dr. Kim, we need to evacuate," called out his surgical assistant, the crystalline Zirian whose chiming voice now carried notes of terror. Her species could survive in vacuum for short periods, but the other beings in the operating theater were not so fortunate. "Stabilize the patient first," Kim replied, his voice steady as steel. Around him, other medical staff were making the same impossible choice. In the trauma bay beyond the surgical suite, he could see Medical Chief Song Minji directing the evacuation of critical patients while plasma fire rained down around them. The Altarian refugees were the first to panic, their silver hair whipping, as they rushed toward the escape pods. The Centaurian traders tried to help carry wounded beings who couldn't move on their own, but it was the human medical staff who stayed behind, working frantically to stabilize patients before the evacuation. Massive explosion rocked the station as another torpedo found its mark. Through the hull breach, Kim could see Vorthan assault shuttles racing toward Aurora 7 like angry wasps. Their engines glowed white-hot as they accelerated, carrying boarding parties of Dominion soldiers. "Sir, we need to go," Lieutenant Oh Sung-min burst into the operating theater, his plasma rifle charged and ready. The young security officer's face was pale with fear, but his duty was clear. "The Vorthans are boarding. They're cutting through the hull on decks 12 through 15. Kim glanced at his patient monitor. Zarthia's neural pathways were almost repaired, but the surgery needed another 10 minutes to complete safely. 10 minutes they didn't have. "Not until this child is stable," Dr. Kim replied, never looking up from his delicate work. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was trying to save a Vorthan child, while Vorthan soldiers were trying to kill him. The attack wasn't random or chaotic. Intelligence reports were flooding in from across 3 sectors of Coalition space, each one more horrifying than the last. Medical Station Mercy in the Tau Ceti system had been vaporized by a coordinated missile strike. The hospital ship, Nightingale, near Proxima Centauri had been boarded and destroyed, with all 3,000 patients and staff killed. The research facility on Kepler 438b, where human doctors were developing treatments for the Scarith plague, had been hit by orbital bombardment. 17 medical facilities in total, each one specifically targeted because of its human medical staff. The Vorthan Dominion had studied coalition forces and identified humanity's healers as a strategic threat that needed to be eliminated. The sound of cutting tools echoed through Aurora 7's corridors as Vorthan soldiers burned their way through blast doors. Their powered armor made them look like mechanical demons, with glowing red visors and weapons that could punch through starship hulls. These weren't regular troops, but Dominion executors, elite forces trained specifically for this kind of terror. Mission. Park Ji-min had abandoned her post at the nursing station and grabbed a plasma rifle from the security locker. The weapon looked enormous in her small hands, but her stance was professional and deadly. She had served in the Colonial Defense Force before becoming a medic, and those skills were coming back quickly. "They're in Section C," she called out, firing controlled bursts at the advancing Vorthan soldiers. All non-combat personnel fall back to the emergency pods, but Song Min-ji wasn't falling back. The medical chief was in the trauma bay, physically carrying wounded patients toward the evacuation routes. A Centaurian child with severe burns, an elderly Altarian with respiratory failure, even some of the Vorthan wounded who had been brought in earlier. She refused to leave anyone behind. When the Dominion soldiers finally breached Aurora 7's main medical bay, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. Dr. Kim was still operating, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. Park Ji-min was defending the trauma ward with deadly precision, her medical training seamlessly blending with combat skills. Song Min-ji was evacuating patients through service corridors, carrying beings who couldn't walk on their own. The Vorthan. Executors had expected to find helpless healers cowering in fear. Instead, they found humans who would die before abandoning their patients. The soldiers showed no mercy. They had clear orders from Dominion High Command: eliminate the tactical advantage that human medics provided to coalition forces. Every human, doctor, nurse, and medical technician, was to be terminated on sight. As Aurora 7 died around them, sparks flying from severed power conduits and atmosphere venting through hull breaches, the surviving medics managed one final act of defiance. Park Ji-min reached the emergency communication array and sent a transmission that would change the course of galactic history. "Earth Command, this is Aurora 7, she whispered into the transmitter, her voice carrying across light years of space. "They made healing a target. Send word to Sol, they've crossed the line." The transmission ended as the medical station's power core finally failed, leaving only darkness and the cold vacuum of space where once there had been hope and healing. The quantum communication arrays on Earth lit up like angry stars as the news traveled faster than light across the galaxy. In homes, offices, and spaceports throughout the Sol system, people stopped what they were doing to watch the horrific footage streaming from Aurora 7 and 16 other medical facilities. Dr. Yoon Jae-sung stood in his apartment overlooking the Swiss Alps, watching the emergency broadcast with hands that trembled like autumn leaves. As Chief Medical Officer of the Terran Medical Corps, he had sent those doctors and nurses to the stars with promises that they would be protected under galactic law. Now he was watching their final moments play out on every screen in human space. The images were burned into his memory forever. Dr. Kim Hyun-woo refusing to abandon his young patient, even as Vorthan soldiers stormed the operating theater. Nurse Park Ji-min fighting with a plasma rifle to protect wounded refugees. medical chief. Song Minji carrying injured beings to safety while the station crumbled around her. Heroes, every one of them, dying because they wouldn't abandon their sacred duty to heal. Within hours, Jae Sung found himself standing before the Global Assembly in Geneva, the same chamber where humanity had first signed the Galactic Medical Accord 50 years earlier. Representatives from every nation on Earth sat in stunned silence as he read the casualty reports, his voice cracking with grief and rage. They killed them while they were saving lives, he said, the words echoing in the vast chamber. Behind him, holographic displays showed the burning remains of medical stations that had once been beacons of hope. Our people died protecting their children, Vorthan children, the same species that murdered them. The initial response was exactly what the galaxy expected from civilized humans. Diplomatic protests were filed through proper channels. The United Nations Security Council called for emergency sessions with coalition leadership. Evacuation orders went out to the remaining medical personnel scattered across 3 sectors of space. But 200 meters beneath the assembly hall, in secure chambers that didn't officially exist, a very different conversation was taking place. Admiral Choi Dae-ho had been tending his garden when the coded message arrived. For 5 years, he had lived quietly in the mountains of South Korea, growing vegetables and trying to forget the things he had done during humanity's expansion into the stars. The uniform hanging in his closet had gathered dust, a relic of darker times when human survival had demanded terrible choices. Now he stood in the underground war room, that same uniform pressed and ready, facing the Defense Council members who had once condemned his methods. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. "You disbanded the Reaper battalions," Admiral Choi said, his voice carrying the weight of old pain. "Called us butchers, war criminals, said we were too brutal for civilized warfare." He gestured to the tactical displays showing the destroyed medical stations. "Is this civilized enough for you?" Defense Minister Ko Sung-hwan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. 5 years ago, he had led the committee that investigated the Reaper Corps after the Proxima incident. Now he was the one asking for their return. "The situation has changed, Admiral. They've targeted our most sacred institutions, our healers." "You understand what you're asking?" Admiral Choi's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every person in the room heard the danger in it. "The Reapers weren't soldiers. They were humanity's answer to extinction. We created them when the hegemony tried to wipe us out during the colony wars. They're not peacekeepers or liberators. They're the sword we forged when mercy became suicide." General Nam Ho-jin, the only other person in the room who had served during the colony wars, nodded grimly. His mechanical arm, a souvenir from the siege of New Seoul, whirred softly as he activated the holographic displays. "They targeted our healers, Dae-ho, not our soldiers or our weapons. Our healers. They've shown the galaxy that mercy is meaningless, that compassion is weakness to be exploited." His artificial fingers drummed against the table. "Perhaps it's time to remind them why we developed mercy in the first place." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity's greatest strength had always been their capacity for both infinite compassion and absolute destruction. The galaxy had seen only one side of that equation for the past 50 years. Admiral Choi walked to the massive viewing screen that showed Earth in all its blue-green glory. Somewhere up there, human medical personnel were fleeing for their lives, abandoning the patients they had sworn to protect. The thought made something cold and terrible stir in his chest. If we do this, there's no going back. The Reapers don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They don't show mercy to those who show none to us. He turned back to face the council. "Are you prepared for the galaxy to see what humans really are when we stop pretending to be civilized?" The vote was unanimous. Across Earth and her colonies, veterans received coded messages that they hadn't seen in half a decade. Former Reaper operatives working as teachers, farmers, engineers, and shopkeepers suddenly remembered skills they had tried to forget. Kang Hye-jin was managing a restaurant in Busan when her communication implant activated. Major Bai In-ho was building houses for refugees when his recall notice arrived. Captain Han So-young was teaching children to fly shuttles when her past came calling. They came from every walk of life, these ghosts of humanity's darker nature. men and women who had hung up their weapons and chosen peaceful lives, believing their war was over. They had families now, careers, hopes for a future where violence was just a memory. But the galaxy had made its choice. By targeting humanity's healers, the Vorthan Dominion had awakened something that had been sleeping in the depths of human space. Something that remembered when mercy was a luxury humanity couldn't afford. In sea. Hidden facilities scattered across the Sol system. Weapons that hadn't been touched in years hummed back to life. Starships designed not for exploration or defense, but for systematic destruction, emerged from mothballs. The Reaper Corps was mobilizing, and this time there would be no rules of engagement, no codes of conduct, no mercy for those who had shown none. The silence before the storm was ending. Soon the galaxy would remember why humanity had needed to develop compassion in the first place, and what happened when that compassion was betrayed. Captain Bay Inho stood on the bridge of the Silent Scythe, watching Vorthan Prime grow from a distant point of light to a massive world of purple. Continents and silver oceans. The planet was beautiful in its own way, home to 3 billion Vorthans who had no idea that their government's actions had awakened humanity's darkest angels. The Silent Scythe was unlike any warship ever built. From the outside, it looked almost peaceful, with clean white hull plating and red medical crosses painted along its sides. But beneath that deceptive exterior lay weapons designed not for quick destruction, but for precise surgical strikes that could cripple entire civilizations, without harming civilians. "Captain," reported Communications Officer Han So-young from her station, "we're receiving multiple hails from Vorthan defense platforms. They're demanding identification and threatening to open fire." Bai smiled grimly. The Vorthans still didn't understand what they were facing. "Open a channel on all frequencies, So-young. Let's introduce ourselves properly." The main view screen flickered to life, showing Bay in his pristine white uniform with its red medical insignia. Behind him, the bridge crew moved with calm efficiency, every one of them wearing the same medical symbols that the Dominion had tried to eliminate. "People of Vorthan Prime," Bay's voice carried across the planet's communication networks. "This is Captain Bay Inho of the Terran Medical Corps. We have come to offer medical aid to your civilians as per Protocol 7 of the Galactic Medical Accords." The response from the planet's surface was immediate and predictable. Defense platforms powered up their weapons. Military bases went to high alert. Fighter squadrons launched from hidden installations, their sleek forms racing toward the human ships like angry hornets. "Broadcasting medical frequencies," reported Han So-young, her fingers dancing across her control panel. "Field hospitals are ready for deployment. All Reaper units are in position." The psychological warfare had begun. As the first Vorthan fighters approached firing range, something extraordinary happened. Instead of engaging them in combat, the human ships simply moved. The Silent Scythe and her sister vessels flowed through space like water, avoiding the incoming fire with impossible grace. Their engines barely whispered, making no effort to outrun or outfight their attackers. Instead, medical shuttles began launching from the human ships, painted with bright red crosses and broadcasting emergency medical frequencies. They ignored the fighters entirely, heading straight for the planet's surface where refugee camps had been spotted by long-range sensors. Major Kang Hye-jin sat in the lead shuttle, checking her equipment one final time. Her uniform was standard, Reaper combat gear, but modified with medical patches and healing symbols from dozens of galactic cultures. The message was clear. They had come as the healers the Dominion had tried to kill. "Approaching the first refugee camp," reported her pilot. "Looks like about 5,000 displaced Vorthans, mostly civilians fleeing the fighting in the outer colonies." Through the shuttle's windows, Kang could see the refugee camp sprawling across a valley floor. Temporary shelters made from salvaged materials, long lines of beings waiting for food and water, medical tents overflowing with wounded who had nowhere else to go. The Vortan military had abandoned these people when the fighting spread to their home system. Their own government had left them to suffer while resources went to the war effort. Now the same humans they had tried to exterminate were coming to help. "Set us down outside the camp perimeter," Kang ordered. "Medical Team Alpha, begin establishing Triage stations. Security teams deploy defensive positions but keep weapons lowered. We're here to heal, not harm. The refugees watched in stunned silence as human medics emerged from the shuttles, carrying advanced medical equipment and supplies that could treat any known species. Dr. Lim Soo-jin, formerly of Aurora 7's sister station, set up the first aid station with practiced efficiency. "We're here to help," she announced in carefully pronounced Vorthan, the same language Dr. Kim had used in his final moments. "Medical treatment is free for all beings, no questions asked." Meanwhile, 50 kilometers away, a very different kind of operation was underway. Lieutenant Colonel Park Dong-wook led his Reaper strike team through the ruins of Vorthan Defense Command, their footsteps silent on the twisted metal floors. The base had been neutralized in less than 10 minutes, not through massive explosions or orbital bombardment, but through precise strikes that disabled every critical system without harming a single person. "Sir," reported his sergeant, "we've secured their main communication array. The base commander is requesting terms for surrender." Park nodded, activating his helmet's translation system. The Vorthan commander was a proud warrior named Velkar, his purple uniform torn and his golden, eyes filled with confusion rather than fear. "Your medical teams," Velkar said slowly. "They're actually treating our people?" "Yes," Park replied simply. "That's what humans do. We heal." The Vorthan commander stared at him for a long moment. "But we attacked your medical stations. We killed your healers." "Yes, you did." Park's voice carried no anger, only cold fact. "And now you're seeing what you lost when you made that choice. Within hours, similar scenes were playing out across 17 Vorthan worlds. Human medical teams established field hospitals outside major population centers, treating anyone who needed help. Vorthan civilians, many of whom had been told that humans were monsters, found themselves being cared for by the same species their government had tried to exterminate. At the same time, every military installation, communication hub and supply depot in the Vorthan Dominion simply stopped working. Not destroyed, but disabled with surgical precision that left the buildings intact but the equipment useless. "Sir," Major Kang's lieutenant reported from the communication array they had captured, "we're receiving thousands of requests from Vorthan civilians asking permission to enter our medical camps." Kang looked out over the valley where human medics were already saving lives that Vorthan doctors had given up on. Children who had been dying from treatable diseases were sitting up and playing. Elderly Vorthans who had suffered for years were walking without pain for the first time in decades. "Granted," she replied. "All of them. Show them what protection they threw away when they targeted our healers." The irony was devastating and deliberate. The Vorthan military found itself fighting an enemy that healed their people while systematically destroying their ability to wage war. Supply lines that had taken decades to build vanished overnight. Command structures that had controlled vast fleets crumbled as their communication networks went dark. But their civilians were safer and healthier than they had been in years, protected and cared for by the very species the Dominion had tried to wipe out. Admiral Velnoth, Supreme Commander of the Vorthan military, stared at the tactical displays in his command bunker with growing horror. Half his fleet was stranded without supplies, their crews requesting permission to seek medical aid from human ships. His ground forces were surrendering not out of fear, but because they wanted to protect the civilians the humans were caring for. In less than 3 weeks, the humans had achieved what no military force had ever accomplished. They had turned the Vorthan people against their own government, not through propaganda or conquest, but through simple acts of healing and compassion. The Dominion's war machine was collapsing, and the weapon destroying it was the same mercy they had tried to eliminate. The surrender ceremony took place aboard the Final Diagnosis, humanity's newest flagship that served as both a hospital ship and command vessel. The massive vessel stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, its white hull gleaming with medical symbols from every known species in the galaxy. But beneath that peaceful exterior lay weapon systems that could dismantle entire star systems without harming a single civilian. Vorthan High Commander Veltar stood in the ship's main conference hall, his once proud uniform now torn and stained. 3 months of watching his empire collapse had broken something fundamental in the powerful alien warrior. His golden eyes, which had once blazed with conquest, now held only desperate pleading. Around him, representatives from across the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The Altarian Council, the Centaurian Trade Federation, even the ancient Nethys Collective had sent observers to witness this moment. None of them had believed that humanity could bring down the mighty Vorthan Dominion. In just 3 months, Admiral Choi Dae-ho entered the chamber with measured steps, his white admiral's uniform bearing both medical insignia and the dark symbols of the Reaper Corps. Behind him walked the survivors of the attacks that had started this war. Dr. Yoon Jae-sung moved carefully, still recovering from injuries he had sustained when his medical transport was destroyed over Kepler 442c. Captain Park So-min, formerly Nurse Park Ji-min, wore her new rank insignia alongside her medical patches, a living symbol of how humanity had changed. "Please," Veltar whispered as he knelt before the human admiral, his massive frame trembling with exhaustion and grief. "Our children are dying. The plague has spread to 17 colony worlds, and our medical infrastructure is gone. We need your healers." The irony was so perfect it felt scripted by fate itself. The same Dominion that had targeted human medical facilities was now begging for medical aid. Their own doctors had been pressed into military service, their hospitals converted to weapon factories, their healing traditions sacrificed on the altar of conquest. Admiral Choi studied the broken leader before him, remembering the images from Aurora 7, the final transmission from the Nightingale. The faces of the 3,000 medical personnel who had died simply for trying to heal the galaxy's wounded. "You targeted our healers," Admiral Choi said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Believing compassion was weakness. You thought mercy made us soft, that our dedication to saving lives was a flaw to be exploited." The galactic representatives leaned forward, sensing that history was being written in this moment. The proud Valorian Empire, which had never surrendered to anyone, watched with newfound respect. The calculating Xerian Collective, masters of cold logic, found themselves reconsidering their understanding of human nature. "You've learned the truth now," Admiral Choi continued, gesturing to the tactical displays that showed the complete collapse of Vorthan military power. "Our mercy wasn't weakness. It was the only thing protecting you from what we really are." Dr. Yoon stepped forward, his medical scanner already active and analyzing Veltar's condition. Despite everything the Vorthan had done, despite the colleagues, whose deaths weighed on his soul, the human doctor's first instinct was still to heal. But now 2 Reaper operatives flanked him, their weapons visible but not threatening. The message was clear. Humanity's healers would continue their work, but they would never again be defenseless. "The Dominion formally surrenders," Veltar managed to say, his voice breaking. "We place ourselves under human medical authority and beg for aid for our civilians." Within hours, human medical ships were racing toward Vortan worlds where plague and neglect had created humanitarian disasters. The same Reaper Corps that had dismantled the Dominion's war machine now protected medical convoys and established field hospitals in the ruins of former military bases. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Dr. Lim Soo-jin, who had survived the destruction of Medical Station Tau Ceti, now worked alongside former Vorthan soldiers to treat plague victims. Captain Kang Hyojin's Reaper teams provided security for medical facilities that treated anyone regardless of species or former allegiance. But the real changes were happening in the halls of galactic power. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus. Prime had never been so quiet as when Admiral Choi delivered humanity's new doctrine to the assembled representatives of 100 worlds. "For 50 years, humanity has served as the galaxy's healers," he said, his words being translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. "We've saved lives without question, treated enemies alongside friends, and asked for nothing in return except the protection of galactic law." The chamber's massive viewing screens showed images from across human space. Medical stations being rebuilt with defensive capabilities that rivaled military fortresses, hospital ships escorted by Reaper vessels, human doctors working under the protection of soldiers who had once been considered too brutal for civilized warfare. That age of defenseless healers is over, Admiral Choi continued. From this day forward, our medical personnel will be protected by forces that answer to no authority except the safety of those who dedicate their lives to healing. Ambassador Zephyr of the Altarian Council raised a crystalline hand. Admiral, surely the galaxy can return to peaceful cooperation. This show of force seems excessive. Admiral Choi's smile was cold as vacuum. Touch our healers again, and you'll discover why the galaxy needed them in the first place. We are capable of infinite compassion and infinite wrath. The choice of which you receive is entirely yours. The new reality settled over the galaxy like morning frost. Human medical facilities resumed their work, but now they were protected by ships that could appear anywhere in the galaxy within days. Reaper operatives, once disbanded as too dangerous for civilized society, now served as guardians of humanity's greatest gift to the stars. The Vorthan Dominion became humanity's first protectorate, their worlds healing under human medical care, while former Dominion soldiers learned to protect the same medical facilities they had once targeted. It was a strange redemption, but one that saved millions of lives. Other species took note and adjusted their policies accordingly. The Scarith Collective, which had been planning to test humanity's resolve, quietly abandoned their aggressive expansion. The hegemony remnants, survivors of humanity's first interstellar war, sent formal apologies for conflicts decades old. Dr. Yoon returned to his work with new understanding. As he treated patients in the rebuilt Aurora 7 station, now protected by a full Reaper garrison, he often thought about the colleagues who had died to teach the galaxy this lesson. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. Captain Park, now commanding her own medical frigate, carried both healing supplies and enough firepower to level cities. The contradiction no longer troubled her. She had learned that sometimes the only way to protect peace was to be prepared for war. The galaxy had learned its lesson through blood and tears. Humanity's healers returned to their sacred work, but they were never again defenseless. In the shadows of every medical facility, Reapers watched and waited, carrying a simple message that echoed across the stars. We heal those who let us. We harvest those who don't. The end.